Warm greetings to our viewers wherever you are here in Nigeria and, of course, around the world. I'm Joke Rogers in Lagos. Let's get right into it. It could be considered a victory for the Haitian police as they parade 26 suspects believed to be a part of the heavily armed commando unit that assassinated President Jovenel Moïse of Haiti this week. The men have been identified as foreign mercenaries, including retired Colombian soldiers. President Moïse was killed in the early hours of Wednesday when gunmen broke into his home in Port-au-Prince, shooting him dead and wounding his wife. The 53-year-old president was found lying on his back with 12 bullet wounds and a gouged eye. His wife, 47-year-old Martine Moïse, was seriously wounded and is being treated at a hospital in Miami, Florida. Well, Haitian police say most of the suspects rounded up were Colombians, along with 2 Haitian Americans. Apart from firearms found on them, sets of US dollar bills, the president's personal checkbook, and the server that held surveillance camera footage from his home were found on them. The government says 11 of the suspects were arrested after breaking into a courtyard at its compound. Angry civilians also joined in the search for the gunmen and helped police track down some who were hiding in bushes. The crowd set fire to 3 of the suspects' cars and destroyed evidence. The Colombian government, on the other hand, says preliminary information indicates that Colombians involved in the assassination were retired members of Colombia's military. The government also says it will cooperate with the investigation. And Haiti's election minister has become the second in the cabinet to speak about the assassination of the country's president. Matthias KIIR said in an interview that Moïse's death was a coup.
Opponents, when people for personal interest get to the point to assassinate a president in exercise. And this was an heinous crime where almost 26 foreign nationals were involved. As the election was already ongoing, and the Prime Minister is intent with the Council of Ministers to continue with the process.
Just like leaders around the world concerned over the political crisis that portends in Haiti, Germany has expressed its concern over the country's political future. Chancellor Angela Merkel's spokesperson told reporters today in Berlin that the German government was looking at future political developments in the country with a certain amount of concern. He also condemned what he called a heinous crime, referring, of course, to President Jovenel Moïse's assassination, and sent his condolences to the people of Haiti and to the president's family. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, joins us now. Maria. So what has been the U.S. government's response to news that 2 of the suspects are Haitian Americans?
This, I think, is somewhat of a surprise. Obviously, we know President Biden 2 days ago put out a memo and put out a spokes piece on the fact that he was saddened by the issue and that he would be definitely working with the government to try to address it. And that does lend us to believe that there might have been some speculation that there could have been some Haitian American involvement. Now, the Justice Department and the State Department are having very little to say. The Justice Department is not speaking on this at all at this time as it relates to the criminal piece dealing with the Haitian Americans. But the State Department is saying that they will be working alongside the Haitian government and that this is being investigated and handled by Haiti. And so at this time, there's very little the U.S. is coming out to say really as to how they will be handling and moving forward, especially with those who are American.
So the police have established the assassination was carried out by a group of foreign mercenaries. Will the U.S. government also be cooperating with the investigations now that its citizens are involved, just like the Colombian government has promised to do?
The U.S. government has not fully come out and stated as the Colombian government has, but they have said that they are going to be following alongside the Haitian government and with this investigation. And so they will not be leading out their own investigation at this time. And so it's going to really be incumbent upon to see what the Justice Department comes out and says due to the fact this is a criminal act. And we know the State Department really deals mostly with the foreign relations piece of this matter, and will obviously be supporting the government of Haiti as it relates to the welfare of the country. And so the criminal piece, I think we're going to have to wait to hear from the Justice Department on that.
And so are there any updates on the health of the First Lady, Martin Moyes, at a hospital in Miami, Florida?
Yeah, she's been in Miami, Florida, and we know that she is under definitely security, but most importantly, she's under the care of doctors here in the United States. And that her care right now is, they don't believe that she will lose her life. They believe that they will be able to bring her, but the updates are very minimal. Obviously, as you know, this is a case that's going to have to be kept very close just due to the nature of what has occurred. But the U.S. ambassador to Haiti says that the condition is critical, but stable.
So yesterday we heard from some, Haitians living in America talking about the situation back at home. Do you know any more of what they're saying about the situation in their country?
Well, the Haitians Americans that I have had the ability to speak with obviously are shocked and outraged. And as you can imagine, those Haitian Americans who are here are ones that believe in democracy. And I think their greatest challenge is the social unrest that exists in the country. And I think this then puts them in a position that they feel that the country is further away from a democratic process than they even were prior to the unfortunate killing of their president.
Right, thanks for that update. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, filling us in with the situation in Haiti there. So let's check in on Afghanistan, as the Taliban, we hear, have captured a major border crossing with Iran in a sweeping offensive across the north of Afghanistan. The militants say they seized two key border towns, Islam Kala near Iran and Tarundi bordering Turkmenistan. Video footage appeared to show Taliban forces taking down the Afghan flag from the roof of a border customs office. The Taliban are rapidly retaking land across Afghanistan as the US-led mission removes the last of its troops. That fact was also pointed out by the Russian government, which says the Taliban controls more than two-thirds of the border between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. The Russian Foreign Ministry also called on all sides of the Afghan conflict to show restraint and says Russia and the Moscow-led military bloc will act decisively to prevent aggression and provocations on the border. In the meantime, Afghan forces have increased personnel at checkpoints in and around the provincial capital of Herat after Taliban fighters seized control of a key district in the western part of the province the day before. A local Afghan official said Taliban fighters had captured an important district in Herat province. Taliban officials say the group had taken control of 85% of the territory in Afghanistan. Dozens of civilians and fighters aligned with a prominent anti-Taliban commander of a private militia, Mohammed Ismail Khan, gathered at a ceremony in Herat and picked up arms with plans to fight. While staying with the development, Taliban officials say the Sunni Muslim insurgent group has taken 85% of the territory in Afghanistan already, and its fighters are tightening their grip on strategic areas. Hundreds of Afghan security personnel and refugees continue to flee across the border into neighboring Iran and Tajikistan, causing concern in Moscow and other foreign capitals that radical Islamists could infiltrate Central Asia. 3 visiting Taliban officials sought to address those concerns during their visit to Moscow, saying, "We will take all measures so that Islamic State will not operate on Afghan territory, and our territory will never be used against our neighbors. In the meantime, India's foreign minister said today that he was concerned as well over developments in Afghanistan and called for a reduction in the level of violence. The situation in the war-torn nation has a direct bearing on regional security, as he told a news conference in Moscow after meeting Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
The situation in Afghanistan occupied a lot of our attention because it has a direct implication for regional security. We believe that the immediate need of the day is really a reduction in violence. And if you have to see peace within Afghanistan and around Afghanistan, that's important for India and Russia to work together to ensure that much of the progress that we have seen in economic and social and democratic terms are maintained. We are both committed to an independent, sovereign, united and democratic Afghanistan.
VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Bob is in Washington as well. Carla joins us now. Carla, great to see you today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So we're seeing the Taliban making such strides across Afghanistan, with even reports that Afghan forces are handing over weapons, and yet the Biden administration. What more, can you tell us about this?
Well, it is very clear that the Taliban has been making gains, several gains. If you look at May 1st, which was when the start of this withdrawal happened, according to the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal, the Taliban had between 75 and 80 districts in their control. That number is now at about 200 of Afghanistan's 400 districts. So they have clearly taken advantage of this current situation, and they are making gains on the battlefield. The Biden administration is looking at this very clear-eyed. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said earlier that they knew what they were getting into. That the outcomes were not sugar-coated when they were being given advice by commanders. But President Joe Biden came out yesterday and he said, "Look, how many more American lives need to be lost? How much longer do you need? The United States has been there for about 20 years. And he said he has looked at the situation and he feels that the United States has done the most that it can do in means of getting the Afghan Air Force prepared, in means of getting the Afghan army prepared, in terms of continuing to fund the Afghan army and to provide aid for the Afghan government." And he says, in his view, there's no reason for the United States forces to still be there other than to protect the airport and to protect the embassy in Kabul.
And so more U.S. troops will now be leaving by August 31st. And President Biden says that the Afghan forces can handle their own security. Many Afghans, on the other hand, feel things will get worse. What are you hearing as regards what the other allied forces are doing to ensure some semblance of security in Afghanistan, at least?
Well, other allied forces, NATO, they have been pulling out as well. The United States is more than 90% complete with this withdrawal. That's what they're saying. We know that there are several hundred still surrounding the embassy, and that will stay even after the withdrawal is fully complete. There are also another few hundred at the airport helping the Turkish forces. Those allies, they are planning to stay and help keep the airport secure, because you've got to understand, this goes without saying, if you don't have security at the airport, then you cannot have diplomatic means on the ground in Kabul. You cannot have embassies. So that is in the interest of all the allied nations to keep those secure. But what I'm hearing on the ground is there are still thousands of interpreters. There are still thousands of people who were like drivers, people who helped the United States in Afghanistan and now desperately want to get out because they fear that the Taliban is after them. And I have heard stories of some being attacked just in recent days, a grenade thrown into the house, into the family home of one of these interpreters who is saying, "Please get me out." So there is still a lot to be done. And the president did say yesterday that he was going to work to get them out in the month of August.
Right. Thank you so much for that update. Correspondent Carla Bob talking to us there on the crisis in Afghanistan. Swedish police say all 9 people have died on board an aeroplane carrying skydivers that crashed in Sweden. The plane was carrying 8 skydivers and a pilot when it crashed close to the runway at Örebro Airport, about 160 kilometers west of Stockholm. The crash is thought to have happened as the plane was taken off. The small propeller plane, a DHC-2 Beaver, had been rented by a local skydiving club for a summer event, according to media in that country. And 52 people have been killed in a factory fire in Bangladesh. 30 others sustained serious injuries. The blaze broke out on Thursday night at the Hashem Food and Beverage Factory in Rupganji and the industrial town near the capital, Dhaka. Authorities say the fire took hold because of chemicals and plastic stored inside the building. Before the incident, the 6-story factory manufactured fruit juices, noodles, and sweet confectionery. While many workers had left for the day when the fire started, it's believed that hundreds of people were still inside overnight. The World Health Organization says Africa has marked its worst COVID-19 pandemic week and the worst is yet to come. The message is coming from the Global Health Agency's Continent Director, Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, adding that with almost 5.7 million cases and more than 146,000 recorded deaths, a third wave of the coronavirus pandemic is gaining speed on the continent. And let's take a look at some other stories now. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has pledged not to return to the country to war in a speech marking 10 years of independence. He hailed a new spirit of dialogue among political rivals and said the transitional government of national unity would focus on economic reforms and improving security. The country is marking the 10th anniversary of its independence with little fanfare. Its population advised to celebrate at home because of COVID-19.
On my part, I assure you that I will not return you back to war again. Let us all work together to recover the lost decade and put our country back to the path of development in this new decade. We have managed to cease hostilities and maintain for nearly two years and 7 months the ceasefire under the expensive peace agreement which we signed in September 2018. We are engaging all-out groups of South Sudan Opposition Movement Alliance, SOMA, through Sant'Egidio in Rome. In Rome mediation process. This process is ongoing and we are committed to reaching agreement with our brothers and sisters in Soma in order to end insecurity in our country.
Finally, Belgium has promised to return artworks plundered from its former Congolese colony as it seeks to confront its brutal colonial past, following a €66 million overhaul of the African Museum to take a more critical view of Belgium's colonial past. The government says it's ready to meet the DRC's calls for restitution.
Belgium's Africa Museum, once a celebration of the country's at times brutal colonial rule, says it will begin a process of returning stolen art to the Democratic Republic of Congo. From the late 19th century up until 1960, thousands of artworks, including wooden statues, elephant ivory masks, manuscripts and musical instruments were looted from the country, likely taken by the Belgian and other European collectors, scientists, explorers and soldiers. Millions of Congolese are estimated to have died when Congo was first a personal fiefdom of King Leopold II before becoming a colony of the Belgian state. Following a $78 million overhaul of the African Museum to take a more critical view of the Belgium's colonial past, the Belgian junior minister, Thomas DERMINE, said the government is ready to meet DRC calls for restitution.
For too long, the Congolese people have been cut off from this inheritance. Their spirituality, the work of their ancestors. These objects do not belong in any way to the Belgian people, and they must be given back and reconnected to their roots.
But the works are not heading back just yet. Though the Belgian government will transfer legal ownership of the artifacts to DRC, it will not immediately ship artifacts unless they are specifically requested. That is partly because Belgium wants to keep them on display. The government also says Congolese authorities are conscious of the bigger audience in Belgium, as DRC has few cultural centers or storage facilities. The African Museum's director, Guido Grissel, says paying a loan fee to DRC could be one way to keep the artifacts in Belgium.
This is going to be difficult because, as I said, for some of it we can use our archives, but for some of them we will need to go to Congo and be there for several weeks or months. And I mean, this object here behind us from Del Commune, I mean, basically it took a scientist more than 6 months and sort of a 3 months stay in Congo, and that's just for one object. Just imagine if we have to do this for 35 or 40,000 objects, how much time it will take. So I guess that in 5 years with a lot of resources we can do a lot, but it could also be a work for the next 10 to 20 years to basically be absolutely sure of all the objects that we have, that we know the precise circumstances by which it was acquired.
In November 2019, DRC President Felix Tshisekedi opened the National Museum in Kinshasa, calling for Congolese artifacts to be gradually returned.
That's a wrap on The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.